They say a marriage falls apart slowly, and then all at once. I never thought it would happen to me, until I saw the video. It was a Wednesday morning when my phone buzzed with a notification. Small town gossip spreads like wildfire, and apparently, someone thought I needed to see what everyone else had already seen. I hesitated for a moment before opening the message. There it was, a grainy video taken at our local cafe, showing my wife, Linda, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, leaning in close. Then, just before the video cut off, they kissed. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I hit replay. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a kiss, the kind that left no room for misinterpretation. I sat there, stunned, replaying every moment of our 35-year marriage in my mind. I thought of the lazy Sunday mornings, the vacations, the inside jokes we'd shared. How had we gone from that to this? The video was spreading fast. The person who filmed it, some nosy neighbor with too much time on their hands, had shared it in a community group. The caption read, "Looks like Linda's found herself a younger man." I could feel the humiliation creeping in. Our life, our marriage, reduced to a public spectacle for everyone to gossip about. But more than the embarrassment, it was the betrayal that cut the deepest. She hadn't just cheated, she'd done it in broad daylight, in a place where anyone could see. I knew I had to confront her. But first, I needed to figure out how long this had been going on. The next morning, I decided to follow Linda. I told myself it wasn't spying, it was getting answers. Answers to questions she'd never give me willingly. She left the house around 10, dressed nicer than usual. Her hair was styled, and she was wearing that blue blouse I always loved. It hurt to see her like that, making an effort for someone else. I trailed her in my truck, keeping a safe distance. She drove to a neighboring town, pulling into the parking lot of a hotel I didn't recognize. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her get out of the car, glancing around nervously before heading inside. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. Was I really about to do this? Was I really about to catch my wife in the act? Yes. I needed the truth, no matter how painful. I grabbed my phone and followed her inside. The lobby was quiet, and the receptionist barely glanced up as I walked past. Linda was nowhere in sight, but I saw the elevator doors closing. I waited, counting the seconds until the light above the door stopped on the 4th floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the 4th floor, I saw her. She was standing in front of a room door, knocking softly. A moment later, it opened, and a man, the same man from the video, pulled her inside. I stood there, frozen. My world was falling apart, and I couldn't move. Then I pulled out my phone and hit record. I drove home in silence, my mind spinning with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? And most importantly, why? Linda wasn't home when I got back. I sat in our kitchen, staring at the video I'd taken. It was undeniable proof of her betrayal, but it didn't make me feel any better. That evening, she walked through the door like nothing had happened. I watched her, trying to see her through new eyes, the eyes of a man who knew the truth. "Jack?" she said, noticing my stare. "You okay? We need to talk," I replied, my voice steady but cold. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Let's talk." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I hit play. Her face paled as the video played. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't say a word. When the video ended, I looked her in the eyes and asked the one question that mattered. "Why?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because I needed to feel alive again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd expected excuses, apologies, anything but that. "Alive?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "And what about me? What about our marriage?" She didn't answer. She just looked away, as if she couldn't bear to face the damage she'd done. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about everything we'd lost over the years. The connection, the love, the understanding. But that didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, feeling the same gnawing emptiness in my chest. It had been there since I saw that damn video. Sleep hadn't helped, and neither did the coffee I made myself, sipping it slowly at the kitchen table where Linda and I had once shared breakfast. Linda was still asleep when I left the house. I needed time to think, time to figure out what to do next. But the one thing I knew for sure? I wasn't going to sit around and let this betrayal eat me alive. I waited down the street, parked behind a row of bushes. My old truck wasn't exactly subtle, but I figured Linda wouldn't be expecting me to tail her. She wasn't the type to cover her tracks carefully. She thought she had me fooled. A little after 10, she emerged from the house. She was dressed nicely again, wearing that same blue blouse. Her hair was freshly styled, and there was a bounce in her step. My stomach churned. Who was she going to see this time? I followed her as discreetly as I could, keeping a few cars behind. She drove out of town, taking the same route as the day before. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Was she heading to the same hotel? As we reached the outskirts of the neighboring town, my suspicions were confirmed. She pulled into the same hotel parking lot. My chest felt tight, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Linda got out of the car, glanced around, and walked inside. I waited for a few minutes before stepping out of my truck. I needed to see for myself. The lobby was quiet when I entered. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer. I scanned the room but didn't see Linda. Then I spotted the elevator. The light above the doors blinked as it ascended, 2nd floor, 3rd, 4th. It stopped at 4. I took the stairs, my heart pounding. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the 4th floor, I stopped to catch my breath. I peeked around the corner and saw her. Linda stood in front of a door, knocking softly. A moment later, it opened, and a man pulled her inside. The door shut behind them, leaving me alone in the hallway, staring at that closed door like it was some kind of cruel joke. For a long moment, I just stood there. My mind was spinning with questions, each one more painful than the last. Who is he? How long has this been going on? Did she ever love me, or was it all just a lie? I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and took a picture of the door. Then I turned and walked away. Back in my truck, I sat in silence. My thoughts were racing, a chaotic mess of anger, confusion, and sadness. I'd never felt more lost. I started the engine and drove aimlessly for a while, letting the road calm my nerves. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a diner we used to frequent. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted through the air as I walked inside. It was comforting in a way, even if my appetite was gone. As I sat there, staring at the coffee in front of me, I couldn't shake the image of Linda standing at that door. I couldn't stop thinking about how different she seemed, like a woman I didn't even recognize anymore. The waitress approached, her friendly smile faltering when she saw the look on my face. "Everything okay, Han?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just rough morning." She nodded, sympathetic. "Coffee's on the house today. You look like you need it." I thanked her, but the kindness only made me feel worse. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted answers. I wanted to know how my marriage had fallen apart without me even noticing. After a while, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the pictures I'd taken. The door number stood out, room 416. It felt like a clue in some mystery I hadn't signed up to solve. And then, without really thinking, I found myself dialing a number I hadn't called in years. "Jack?" Mike's familiar voice answered after a few rings. "What's up, buddy?" Mike had been my best friend for decades. We'd worked together on countless construction projects, shared more beers than I could count, and always had each other's backs. If there was anyone who could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. "I need to talk," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "It's about Linda." There was a pause. Then, with a seriousness I hadn't heard from Mike in a long time, he said, "Tell me everything." And I did. By the time I finished, Mike was quiet for a long moment. "Jesus, Jack," he finally said. "I'm sorry. That's rough." I rubbed my face, exhaustion settling in. Yeah. Mike sighed. You sure you want to keep following her? Maybe it's better to just confront her and get it over with. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I need to know the whole truth. Mike didn't argue. He understood. All right, he said. But be careful. This kind of thing, it can eat you alive if you're not careful. I knew he was right. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Back at home that evening, Linda was quiet. She didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't volunteer any information. We moved through the house like strangers, both of us pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine. And tomorrow, I would follow her again. I had to uncover just how deep the betrayal went. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda with that man. Room 416. The image burned itself into my mind like a brand, and no amount of tossing or turning could shake it loose. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. I needed to confront her. When Linda walked into the kitchen, I was already seated at the table. The coffee pot was empty. I'd drained it hours ago, but I still sat there, staring at my phone. I'd replayed the video of her at the hotel more times than I cared to admit. Morning, she said, her voice casual. Too casual. I looked up, meeting her gaze. We need to talk. Linda froze for a moment before slipping into her usual calm demeanor. Sure. What's on your mind? I didn't bother with pleasantries. I reached across the table, grabbed my phone, and hit play. The video I'd recorded the day before filled the silence between us. Her expression shifted from surprise to something else, something darker. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. You tell me, I replied, my tone icy. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to me. Linda sat down slowly, folding her hands in front of her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. I'm not going to deny it, she said. I've been seeing someone. My stomach churned. Even though I'd known the truth, hearing her say it out loud made it real. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Linda sighed, running a hand through her hair. Because I've felt dead inside for years. And you didn't notice? I stared at her, dumbfounded. Dead inside? Linda, we've been married for 35 years. How can you say that? She met my gaze, her eyes hard. Because it's true. You stopped seeing me a long time ago, Jack. I became part of the furniture, something you barely noticed. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I really been that blind? I thought back to all the times I'd come home late from work, too tired to talk. The times I'd chosen silence over conversation, assuming everything was fine because it was easier that way. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. So what? You decided to fix it by screwing some guy in a hotel room? I shot back, anger creeping into my voice. Linda flinched but held her ground. I needed to feel alive again. And he made me feel that way. And what about me? I demanded. Did you even think about what this would do to me? To us? She shook her head. It wasn't about you, Jack. It was about me. Silence hung between us, heavy and oppressive. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, numb. Finally, I spoke. Is it over? Linda hesitated. I don't know. That was the final blow. I pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. Then figure it out. Because I'm not going to live like this. As I walked away, Linda called after me. Jack! Wait! But I didn't stop. I couldn't. My world had already fallen apart, and I needed time to pick up the pieces. I drove aimlessly for hours, the roads blurring together. Eventually, I found myself at the old construction yard where Mike and I used to work. The place was abandoned now, overgrown with weeds and rusted equipment. But it felt like the only place where I could breathe. I sat on the hood of my truck, staring out at the horizon. Memories flooded back, memories of better times, of laughter and hard work and shared dreams. Back when life felt simpler. Mike's voice echoed in my mind, be careful. This kind of thing can eat you alive, He was right. And as much as I wanted to wallow in my anger and grief, I knew I couldn't let it consume me. I needed a plan. That evening, I returned home to find Linda sitting on the porch, waiting for me. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of our crumbling marriage. "Jack," she said softly, "I don't want to hurt you." "Too late for that," I replied, my tone cold. She nodded, accepting the truth. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I want to fix this." I crossed my arms, studying her. "Do you? Or are you just scared of what happens next?" Linda looked away, tears glistening in her eyes. "Both." For the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable. Human. But love wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. "I need time," I said. "Time to figure out what's left of us, if there's anything left at all." Linda nodded. "I understand." As I walked inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The truth had been exposed, but there were still secrets lurking in the shadows. And I was going to uncover every last one of them. The day after my confrontation with Linda, I met Mike at our favorite diner. The place hadn't changed in years, same cracked vinyl booths, same strong coffee that tasted more like burnt toast than anything else. But it was familiar, and I needed that. Mike slid into the booth across from me, his usual smirk replaced by a serious expression. "All right, Jack," he said. "Tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath, then laid it all out, the video, the hotel, the confrontation. Mike listened without interrupting, his brows furrowing deeper with each new detail. When I finished, he shook his head. "That's rough, buddy. Real rough." I nodded. "Yeah. And now I'm stuck. Do I forgive her? Do I walk away? I don't know what the hell to do." Mike leaned back, folding his arms. "She went public with her affair, right? Everyone in town's talking about it." "Yeah," I muttered, bitterness creeping into my voice. "She didn't even try to hide it." Mike tapped his fingers on the table. "So why not go public with the truth?" I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "She humiliated you in front of the whole town. You've got every right to set the record straight. Post your side of the story. Let people know what she did." At first, the idea sounded crazy. I wasn't the type to air my dirty laundry for the world to see. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Linda had painted me as the bad guy for years, quietly chipping away at my reputation. Maybe it was time to reclaim my narrative. "I don't know," I said slowly. "It feels petty." Mike leaned forward. "It's not about revenge, Jack. It's about dignity. Don't let her control the story." That night, I sat down at my desk with a pen and paper. I'd always found it easier to think when I wrote things down by hand. I started with a simple header, "To everyone who knows me." Then, the words poured out. I wrote about my marriage, about the love I'd had for Linda and the life we'd built together. I wrote about the slow erosion of that love, the distance that had grown between us. And finally, I wrote about the betrayal, the affair, the lies, and the public humiliation. I didn't hold back, but I also didn't attack Linda. I wanted people to understand my pain without turning it into a smear campaign. When I finished, I read it over twice. It was raw and honest, exactly what I needed it to be. The next morning, I typed it up and posted it online. I wasn't sure what to expect, maybe some sympathy, maybe some backlash. But once it was out there, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like I'd taken back a piece of myself. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, my post had been shared dozens of times. Comments poured in, some from old friends, some from people I barely knew. "Jack, I'm so sorry you're going through this. It takes a lot of guts to be this honest. You deserve better, man." For the first time in days, I felt seen. Heard. People understood my pain, and they stood with me. But not everyone was supportive. Linda's sister, Kathy, was one of the first to comment. "Maybe if you'd been a better husband, this wouldn't have happened." That one stung hard. I debated whether to respond, but before I could, someone else did it for me. "Mike. Maybe if your sister hadn't cheated, he wouldn't have to post this in the first place." I couldn't help but smile. Mike always had my back. Later that day, I received a message from someone unexpected, Ryan, the man from the video. "Jack, I think we need to talk." My heart pounded as I read the message. What could he possibly have to say to me? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a park on the edge of town. It was a quiet place, away from prying eyes. Ryan looked nervous when I arrived. He was younger than I'd thought, maybe late 30s, early 40s. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding eye contact. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. I crossed my arms. "I'm not sure why I'm here." Ryan sighed. I wanted to apologize. I didn't know Linda was still married when we first met. She told me you two were separated." I clenched my jaw. "And you believed her?" "I did at first," he admitted. "But then I started seeing the cracks. She'd get cagey whenever I asked about her past. She was always worried about being seen in public. And when that video got out, well, that's when I realized the truth." I stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. He seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to forgive him just yet. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Ryan took a deep breath. "Because you deserve to know. And because there's more. Linda's hiding something from you, something big." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I think it's better if you see for yourself. There's a storage unit in her name. She's been keeping things there for years. Things you need to see." I frowned. "How do you know about this?" Ryan looked away. "She trusted me. But after everything, I realized I couldn't keep it from you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then, finally, I nodded. "Give me the address." Ryan scribbled it down on a piece of paper and handed it to me. "Good luck, Jack. You're going to need it." As I walked back to my truck, the paper clutched in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. And whatever was in that storage unit? It was going to change everything. The drive to the storage facility was long and filled with tension. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles whitening with every mile. Ryan's words echoed in my head, *, she's been keeping things there for years. Things you need to see, *. What the hell could she be hiding from me? When I arrived, the place looked just like every other storage facility I'd ever seen, rows of metal doors, each one hiding secrets. It smelled of dust and rusted locks, the air thick with stale memories. I found the unit Ryan had mentioned. Number 211. My heart pounded as I approached. The padlock was sturdy but well-worn. I took a deep breath, pulled out the key Ryan had given me, and unlocked it. The door creaked as I rolled it up, revealing boxes stacked neatly inside. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Old photo albums, suitcases, and random household items. But something felt off. Too intentional. I stepped inside and began to sift through the boxes. The first box I opened was filled with letters. Handwritten notes, some dating back over 20 years. They were from me, to Linda. Anniversary cards, love letters, little notes I'd left her over the years. She'd kept them all. I felt a pang of emotion, remembering the love we once shared. But that emotion quickly soured when I saw what was underneath the letters. A file folder labeled Jack's Mistakes. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the folder and felt my blood run cold. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, legal documents, things I thought I'd buried long ago. One email stood out. * subject, read the deal, Jack. Just a reminder, the payment is due next week. Don't mess this up. *. I sat down on one of the boxes, my mind reeling. The email was from a man named Charles Benson. The name brought back memories I'd tried to forget. Years ago, during a rough patch at work, I'd made a shady deal to keep the business afloat. I thought it was long behind me. But Linda knew. She'd kept the evidence all these years. Why? I kept digging, finding more documents that painted a picture I didn't want to see. Linda had been tracking my every move for years. Bank accounts, investments, even my retirement funds. She knew everything. Then I found something that made my heart stop. A will. Not the one we drafted together years ago, but a new one. Dated just 6 months ago. And in it, Linda was the sole beneficiary of everything: our house, my savings, everything we built together. I felt sick. Had she been planning this all along? Building a case against me while I was none the wiser? I slammed the folder shut, breathing heavily. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated move to ruin me. As I sat there, trying to process it all, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mike. Asterisk, how's it going? Find anything? Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. Asterisk, yeah. More than I wanted to. Asterisk. His reply came quickly. Asterisk, come by the diner. We need to talk. Asterisk. I locked the storage unit and drove back into town, my mind racing. By the time I reached the diner, Mike was already waiting for me, a cup of coffee in front of him. You look like hell, he said as I slid into the booth. Feel like it too, I muttered. Mike leaned forward. So? What did you find? I told him everything, about the emails, the will, the folder labeled Jack's mistakes. By the time I finished, Mike was shaking his head. Jesus, Jack. That's cold. Yeah, I said, staring down at my coffee. It is. Mike was quiet for a moment before speaking. So what are you gonna do? I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't let Linda win. I need to figure out why she's been holding on to this stuff, I said. There's more to this than just an affair. Mike nodded. You're right. This isn't just about love or betrayal. It's about control. I looked up at him. And I'm done letting her control me. When I got home, Linda was waiting for me again. She was sitting on the porch, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as I approached. Jack, she said softly. Can we talk? I stood there for a moment, studying her. The woman I'd loved for so many years now felt like a stranger. I found the storage unit, I said. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction. I see. Why, Linda? I asked, my voice raw with emotion. Why keep all that? Why plan for this? She sighed, setting her glass down. Because I knew this day would come. What day? I demanded. The day you decided to destroy me? Linda shook her head. No. The day you finally saw the truth. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. But I wasn't ready to accept them. Not yet. That night I barely slept. The weight of what I'd found in the storage unit hung over me like a dark cloud. Linda had been preparing for this moment for years. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever could have imagined. Morning came too soon. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, lost in thought. Then my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. Asterisk, we need to talk. Please, asterisk. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was another conversation with him, but something told me he had more to say. And I needed answers. Meet me at the park in an hour, I replied. Ryan was already waiting when I arrived. He looked anxious, pacing back and forth near a bench. When he saw me, he stopped, shoving his hands into his pockets. Thanks for coming, he said. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. This better be good. Ryan nodded, taking a deep breath. I owe you the truth. All of it. You've already told me enough. I snapped. You were sleeping with my wife. What more is there? He winced but didn't back down. I didn't know she was married at first. When I found out, I ended things. But Linda, she wasn't ready to let go. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? Ryan glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. Linda told me things, about your marriage, about your past. She said she was trapped, that you were controlling. I clenched my jaw. And you believed her? At first, yes, he admitted. But then I started seeing through her lies. She's not who she pretends to be. I took a step closer. What exactly are you trying to say? Ryan hesitated before pulling out his phone. I recorded some of our conversations. I didn't know who to trust, but I thought you might need to hear this. He played the recording. Linda's voice came through, cold and calculating. Jack thinks he's untouchable. But he has skeletons in his closet, and I'm going to make sure they come out when the time is right. He won't know what hit him. The recording ended, leaving me stunned. She planned this, I whispered. She's been planning it for years. Ryan nodded. I think she wanted to destroy you, Jack. Not just leave you, ruin you. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. The anger and hurt boiled inside me, threatening to spill over. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why not walk away and forget it all? Ryan sighed. Because I've seen what she's capable of. And I don't want to be her next target. I left the park feeling more confused than ever. Linda's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was calculated, deliberate. She wanted to destroy me. When I got home, Linda was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. Where were you? She asked. Out, I replied curtly. She set the magazine down. Jack, we need to talk. I crossed my arms. Do we? Or are you just going to keep lying to me? Her eyes narrowed. I've never lied to you. I laughed bitterly. You've been lying to me for years. I found the storage unit, Linda. I know everything. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. You don't know the whole story. Then tell me, I demanded. Tell me why you've been planning to ruin me. Linda stood, smoothing her hands over her skirt. Because you deserved it. I stared at her, stunned. What? You think you're the victim here, Jack? She snapped. You think I'm the villain? You had an affair first. Years ago. And I forgave you. But I never forgot. The room spun as her words sank in. I thought we moved past that, I said quietly. You did, Linda replied. But I didn't. You broke my heart, Jack. And now I've broken yours. The silence between us was deafening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So this was all about revenge? I asked. You destroyed our marriage to get back at me for something that happened decades ago? Linda's expression softened, but there was no regret in her eyes. It's not just about revenge. It's about balance. I shook my head. There's no balance in this, Linda. Only destruction. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. Jack, we can still fix this. I pulled away. No. We're done. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. She knew it was over. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. I couldn't stay there anymore. The memories, the lies, the betrayal, it was too much. I drove to Mike's place, knocking on his door just as the sun began to set. Jack, he said, surprised. What's going on? I sighed heavily. I need a place to stay. Mike nodded, stepping aside to let me in. Of course. As I settled into the guest room, I realized that this was just the beginning. Linda might have won this round, but I wasn't going to let her destroy what was left of my life. I had a plan. And this time, I was going to see it through. Staying at Mike's place gave me some breathing room, but my mind was far from at ease. The revelation about Linda's long-term plot to ruin me wasn't something I could easily shake off. I couldn't stop thinking about that storage unit and the folder labeled Jack's mistakes. One thing was clear: I needed to know everything. The next morning, I drove back to the storage unit. The same stale air greeted me as I rolled up the door, but this time, I was determined to dig deeper. There had to be more that I missed the first time. I started opening every box, rifling through papers, photo albums, and anything that seemed remotely suspicious. Most of it was mundane, old bills, receipts, and keepsakes. But then I found something that made my heart race. A locked metal box. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and heavy. The lock was old and rusted, but sturdy. I searched through the boxes for a key, but came up empty. I wasn't about to let a little lock stop me. Grabbing a tire iron from my truck, I pried at the box until the lock snapped open with a loud crack. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were more documents, legal papers, financial records, but what caught my attention most was a series of photographs. Linda, smiling, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. The photos were taken in various locations, hotels, parks, even what looked like someone's home. In every picture they looked happy, comfortable, like a couple. I flipped through them, my stomach turning with each new image. This wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper. Then I found the letters. Each one was addressed to Linda, and each one signed by the same name, Charles Benson. I sat down heavily, the name hitting me like a freight train. Benson was the same man I'd made that shady business deal with years ago. The same man who had threatened me in those emails I found. And now, it seemed, he was more involved in my life than I ever realized. I took the box back to Mike's house, my mind spinning. When I arrived, Mike was out on the porch, a beer in hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said as I climbed out of the truck. "Might as well have," I replied, holding up the metal box. "We need to talk." Inside, I laid out everything I'd found, photos, letters, documents. Mike listened quietly, his expression growing darker with each new piece of evidence. "So, this Benson guy," Mike said, tapping one of the letters. "You think he's the one Linda's been seeing?" I nodded. "Looks like it. But it's more than that. He's tied to my past mistakes." Mike frowned. "You think he's blackmailing her?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they're working together." Mike leaned back, rubbing his chin. "Either way, you need to be careful. This guy sounds dangerous." "I know," I agreed. "But I need to know why Linda's been keeping this secret." That evening, I decided to confront Linda again. I couldn't let this mystery fester any longer. When I pulled up to the house, her car was in the driveway. The lights were on, casting a warm glow through the windows. It looked peaceful, like any other night in our quiet neighborhood. But nothing about this was normal anymore. I knocked on the door, and Linda opened it, her expression wary. "Jack," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" I held up the box. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked to the box, and I saw the flicker of fear return. "Where did you get that? Does it matter?" I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "What matters is what's inside." Linda backed away slightly, crossing her arms. "I don't know what you think you found, but—" "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "I know about Benson. I know about the letters, the photos. I know everything." Her face paled. "Jack, it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been planning this for a long time." Linda sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked up, tears in her eyes. "I was scared," she whispered. "Benson came back into my life, and he threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd ruin both of us." I stared at her, trying to process her words. "Help him with what?" Linda shook her head. "He wanted leverage over you. He wanted to make sure you'd never expose him. And I went along with it because I thought it was the only way to protect us." My heart pounded in my chest. "Protect us? You've been working against me this whole time. I didn't know what else to do," Linda cried. "He has connections, Jack. Powerful ones." I was scared. I took a step back, shaking my head. You should have told me. We could have faced him together. Linda's eyes filled with regret. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I see now that I was wrong. Silence filled the room as I struggled to process everything she'd said. Benson had been pulling the strings all along, using Linda to keep me in check. But why? And what was his endgame? As I left the house that night, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Benson win. No matter what it took. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of information I could about Charles Benson. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how dangerous he was. He wasn't just some shady businessman. I found whispers of blackmail, fraud, and even connections to organized crime. But what haunted me most was Linda's involvement. How long had she been under his thumb? And how much of what she'd done was out of fear, and how much was by choice? One thing was certain. I needed to confront Benson himself. But I couldn't do it unprepared. I met Mike at the diner again, laying out everything I'd discovered. This guy's no joke, Mike said, shaking his head as he flipped through the documents I'd collected. You sure you want to poke this bear? I nodded. I don't have a choice. He's been controlling my life from the shadows for too long. It's time to end it. Mike leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms. All right. What's the plan? First, I need to find him, I said. I've got an address from some old business records. It's a start. Mike frowned. And then what? You knock on his door and ask politely for him to leave you alone? No, I replied, my voice firm. I'm going to make sure he knows I'm not afraid of him anymore. The address led me to a house on the outskirts of town. It was large, secluded, and had the kind of security system that made it clear the owner had something to hide. I parked my truck down the street and approached on foot, staying in the shadows. As I got closer, I noticed a side gate leading to the backyard. It was locked, but I managed to scale the fence without too much trouble. The backyard was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the security cameras. I crept toward the back door, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to knock, the door opened. I was wondering when you'd show up, a voice said. Charles Benson stood in the doorway, a smug smile on his face. You've been busy, Benson said, motioning for me to step inside. Come on in. We've got a lot to talk about. I hesitated for a moment before stepping into the house. The interior was as luxurious as I'd expected, polished wood floors, expensive furniture, and art that probably cost more than my truck. Benson led me to a study, where he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I've been keeping an eye on you, Jack, he said, handing me a glass. You've been digging into my past. I'm flattered. I set the glass down without taking a sip. Why are you doing this? Why go after me and my wife? Benson chuckled, sitting down behind his desk. It's nothing personal, Jack. Just business. You were a means to an end. Linda was a useful ally. She was terrified of you, I said, my voice low. She thought you'd destroy us both. And she was right, Benson replied, leaning forward. I could have ruined you at any moment. But I didn't. Because you still have value to me. Value? I echoed, my fists clenching. I'm not playing your games anymore. Benson smirked. Oh, but you are. Whether you like it or not. The conversation continued, with Benson revealing more about his hold over Linda and his plans to keep me in line. He thought he had me cornered, that I was too scared to fight back. But he underestimated me. You think you're untouchable, I said, standing up. But you've made one big mistake. Benson raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what's that? I leaned in, meeting his gaze. You pushed me too far. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being his pawn. When I got back to Mike's place, he was waiting on the porch. Well? He asked. I've got what I need, I said. Now it's time to end this. Mike nodded. What's the next step? I took a deep breath. We're going public. Everything, Benson's crimes, his threats, the way he's controlled Linda and me. We're going to expose it all. Mike grinned. About damn time. As I sat down next to him, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control of my life again. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The decision to go public wasn't easy. I knew that exposing Charles Benson meant putting myself, and possibly Mike, in danger. But the time for fear had passed. Benson had controlled my life for too long, and I wasn't going to let him win. I spent the next few days compiling everything I had, documents, photos, recordings. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a man who had built his empire on lies and manipulation. But I knew that simply posting it online wouldn't be enough. I needed to confront Linda one last time. When I arrived at the house, Linda was waiting on the porch. She looked tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "Jack," she said softly as I approached. "We need to talk," I replied. She nodded, standing aside to let me in. The house felt different, emptier, colder. Or maybe it was just me. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "I'm going public with everything," I said, breaking the silence. Linda's eyes widened. "Everything?" I nodded. "Benson's crimes, his threats, your involvement. People need to know the truth." Linda looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "And what happens to me?" "That's up to you," I said. "But if you want any chance at redemption, you need to come clean." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay." Mike and I set up a meeting with a local journalist, a woman named Sarah who had a reputation for taking down powerful men. She listened intently as we laid out the evidence, her eyes widening with each new revelation. "This is huge," she said when we finished. "But it's also dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this?" I glanced at Mike, who gave me a reassuring nod. Then I looked back at Sarah. "We're sure," I said. Sarah smiled. "All right. Let's bring him down." The article went live a week later. It was a bombshell, detailing Benson's criminal activities, his manipulation of Linda, and his threats against me. The story spread quickly, picking up traction on social media and even making national news. Benson tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Within days, law enforcement agencies launched an investigation, and Benson went into hiding. But it wasn't over yet. One evening, as I sat on Mike's porch, watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Asterisk, you think you've won, Jack? But this isn't over, asterisk." I stared at the message, my mind racing. Benson might have been exposed, but he wasn't done with me yet. Mike noticed the tension in my expression. "What's wrong?" I handed him the phone. He read the message and shook his head. "Bastard's not giving up." "No," I said quietly. "But neither am I." In the following weeks, I worked with Sarah to ensure Benson's story stayed in the public eye. More victims came forward, each one adding another layer to the case against him. Linda, for her part, did her best to make amends. She gave a statement to the police, detailing everything she knew about Benson's operations. It wasn't enough to undo the damage she'd done to our marriage, but it was a start. One day, she approached me as I stood in the backyard of Mike's house. "Jack," she said softly. "I'm sorry." I turned to face her. "For what?" She swallowed hard. "For everything. For lying, for hurting you, for letting Benson control me." I studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her eyes. "Why did you do it, Linda? Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Because I was scared. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now that I was only protecting myself." I nodded slowly. "It's going to take time." "I know," she said. "But I'm willing to wait." The investigation into Benson continued, and eventually, he was arrested while trying to flee the country. Seeing his mugshot on the news brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. But life didn't return to normal. It couldn't. I moved out of Mike's place and got my own apartment in town. Linda and I remained in contact, but our relationship was different, strained, but healing. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Sarah. Asterisk, you did it, Jack. Justice is served. Asterisk. I smiled, setting the phone down. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I'd lost a lot, but I'd gained something invaluable, freedom from the past. And no one would ever take that from me again.